And I was in a coffee shop, and this was when I was still just grinding in the corporate dermatology gig. But once in a while, I'd have some free time to do this creative stuff. And I was just reading a book, and I overheard this guy talking his first investment property when he was 18 years old. And I was like, what's going on here? And I kept listening. And as I left, I didn't have business cards. I wrote my name and number on a scrap piece of paper, ripped it off, stopped by the table and said, excuse me, I'm sorry, I overheard you. I'm a local investor. And if you want to talk to me, here's my name and number. And I apologize for interrupting.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐞𝐬𝐿.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I'm so excited today to get the opportunity to talk to Dr. Stephen Lewellis. Stephen, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate you having me on tonight, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Absolutely, man. Well, so excited to have you on the show. It's been cool to connect over LinkedIn and chat some through the platform and see what all you're doing there with dermatology and direct care, and really excited to get into that as well as, of course, real estate. So thanks for taking the time to come on the show tonight.
You're welcome.
Well, when we get started, would you mind just kind of sharing a little bit about yourself, your kind of journey?
My pleasure. So I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania. The closest big city was Allentown. So people ask me, they mention Billy Joel all the time. And grew up a big Philadelphia sports fan, stayed there until I finished college. I went to Haverford College, which is right outside of Philadelphia, and then went to New York City for med school and actually the medical scientist training program. So I did an MD PhD program at New York University. That's where I ended up meeting my wife. She is from Wisconsin, but we met in New York City. And for my residency training, a year in Salt Lake City, Utah, which was incredible. Best year my wife and I ever in terms of where we lived. You know, the lifestyle wasn't so awesome in terms of my lifestyle for being an intern, but whenever I wasn't being an intern, we were skiing or hiking or with our dog and just living her best life. And that was a lot of fun. Went to California, Northern California, where I was at Stanford for 3. Then we went to Minneapolis after that for my first job, and pandemic. We had a baby boy during the pandemic, first job, a lot of stress. I wasn't loving the job. I said, what do you think about moving home where your parents are, their grandparents? Do you want to give it a shot? And she was willing, and we gave it a shot. And that's where we are right now, at least. That's been over 2 years now that we're in her hometown of Wausau, Wisconsin. And we had another child since then. We had a baby girl. She's 1.5 years, and my son is 4. And I am calling myself a recovering corporate dermatologist at this point, because I am no longer in the corporate big hospital practice game. That was involuntary, and sort of an involuntary exit, and we can get into later. But that launched me prematurely, but I was going to go this way anyway. I could not work at a place like that forever. Enough alignment, not sustainable for me, but launched me prematurely into this entrepreneurship route. And I'm now starting a direct care, meaning no insurance, still medical dermatology practice, but a direct care practice. And I have a podcast as well that I just launched. So we have a lot of commonalities there. I'm happy to expand on any of that, but that's where I'm at. Just doing the podcast, building the practice, meeting people like you, doing things like this is what really gives me joy right now, in addition to obviously being with my family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just so much fun. Like we were talking about off camera, just getting to network with physicians who are just doing awesome things in medicine and out of medicine and in real estate and entrepreneurship. It's really cool. And of course, you know, the family space as well, the same way. You know, I definitely prioritize my family, and you know, we have a 3-year-old, and we were talking about how much fun it is to get them in the toddler bed and sleep training and so forth.
Yeah.
Before we kind of hop into medicine and real estate, just kind of, you know, thinking about how do you balance being a physician, an entrepreneur, a husband, a father? How do you balance that? How do you prioritize everything? Any tips or tricks in regards to that?
Poorly is the right and honest answer. I think if you asked anyone to answer that, especially at the beginning, they would be poorly. And the only way that would not be acceptable is if you didn't recognize it and try to get better at it. We're all works in progress, a lot of people say, and that certainly is what I am. In the work side, the career side, professional development, business side is wonderful for me right now because I'm finally getting to do something that feels aligned with who I am, who I ultimately want to be, where I want to go, the way I want to be able to help people with the degree that I've earned and the privilege I've earned to be able to have a medical degree and take care of people. There are all the cups, right? There's the career, the business / career cup. There's the personal health and wellness and all of that cup. There's family, there's spouse if you have one, or partner, and all of those matter equally. I would say matter more than others, and all of them need filling, but you can't fill them at the same time. That's the common pitfall. And when we're at the beginning of an entrepreneurial journey, it can get very immersive and it can be fun. It's a high at some times because things are happening, or there's a lot of lows as well, but you can be immersed in it because there's always another thing to do. The to-do list is never done. As soon as you check one to do, 10 more open up, which is awesome, but you have to intentionally stop filling that cup so you can fill the others, because you can't fill them, and recognize that you need to sacrifice your business at times for your family or for yourself, your own personal health, or sometimes you need to sacrifice something about your family for your business or any other cup that you have. But that has to be balanced still, even though we're not filling all of them at the same time. And that's my sort of North Star. That's what I'm shooting for. I am doing it better now than I was at the beginning, but it's still difficult. And I think that the advice is think about it and get help with it. Ask someone who's a little further along, or, if you know someone who went through something, maybe they built a business and they got divorced. That's not, something terrible happened. Maybe it wasn't related, but ask them for advice. If you have a friend who may have screwed up in that regard or anything like that, just ask for help and be thinking about it. I have a therapist. He's very helpful with this type of thing. I have just done a lot of work up here to recognize when I'm going wrong. And I have a wife who tells me when I'm going wrong, and I really respect that about her. And I've got better at not being defensive when that happens. So again, poorly is the short answer, but I think I'm doing better than I was yesterday, and certainly better than I was. So.
Well, that's what it's all about, just getting a little bit better each day. And, I think you brought up a couple of really great points. One, you have to fill up your cup first, so then you can fill up everybody else's. And I heard another saying that was essentially along the lines of like, you need to cut the bottom off of your cup, but keep it full, where then that's running out to everyone else's cups along the way. So what's getting poured into you is getting poured out. And that's probably not exactly how it goes, but you get the idea there as well. And, it's important. And I think the other thing I was thinking about too is I feel like oftentimes folks think like, I'm going to leave medicine, or I'm going to start this entrepreneurial journey, or open up a small business, and then I'm going to have all this free time. And that's not true, as you alluded to. Like, there's always another thing, another box to check as you're getting started in your entrepreneurial journey. So thanks for being open about that. If you don't mind, can you kind of walk us through the timeline of like dermatology and corporate medicine? What some of your frustrations were and what led to direct care, and we'll hit on the direct care dermatology practice that you're starting and how awesome that is, and tie that into real estate as well.
My pleasure. Before I answer those questions, I want to reflect on something that you mentioned. You said the idea of having all this free time when we start working for ourselves or going on this entrepreneurial journey or building a business. And it's true. It's a wonderful asset. It's actually time that we are free to use as we wish, which is, for a lot of us, that autonomy is something that we lose along the way. And that's, for me, a huge part of what burned me out, was this misalignment burnout. I just didn't have the autonomy, and it was very frustrating, whether it was related to insurance or anything like that. I just didn't feel like I was doing what I was meant to do. But you sacrifice a lot when you're an employee, but all those things that you're getting in return, you have to sacrifice when you go the self-employed route. So you have to keep those in mind. It's free time, you get to use it, but you need to use it to produce something if you want to have a livelihood and family and all that. So I am glad you brought up the free time. Regarding my experience with being a dermatologist after residency, I went right into a job. I never thought I could have my own practice. I didn't have role models. People were not talking positively, in my world at least, about having an independent private practice. All the talk was just getting harder and harder. It's not what it used to be. reimbursements on costs go up. There's how it doesn't feel like you could do that. So I just wanted to go and get a job. It was a long haul. My wife was really supportive. We moved all over the place, and I just wanted us to go settle somewhere, have a good income that we've earned and had that delayed gratification for. And it was 4 years between two different jobs. The jobs were pretty similar, big companies. I just felt like a cog in the wheel, but I was making good money and I was not loving the job, but I liked the staff. I liked the patients, but the day-to-day grind of it was really wearing on me. And I did not feel aligned with the work. And in the second job that I had, I was not honest with myself about how misaligned I was. And I was also not, as a result, not honest with my family. It didn't feel deceitful to me because it was like, we are financially secure because we've built a foundation intentionally so that we're not living paycheck to paycheck. And, you know, the whole live like a resident thing, that's always been part of my philosophy even before med school and all of that. I grew up that way. And so I approached this job like, this job should be something that I'm excited to do and I have agency over and I can speak my mind. And if I feel like things are going in a direction that is concerning, I want to be able to be part of it and speak about that. And on numerous occasions, my wife said, should you be, you know, as vocal at work because I was an employee. I wasn't in administration. I wasn't in leadership. And I disregarded those warnings. And that was completely immature and untrustworthy of me, actually. And I've learned a lot from that. But I just kept going. I was like, I'm not going to lose my job. They need dermatologists here. There's no dermatologists around. We have 1,000 people on the wait list. And I went in one day to what I thought was negotiate my contract because the 2-year contracts just auto renew. And I said, I don't want my contract to auto renew. That's weird. First of all, let's talk about this. They brought me in and they simply said, we're not renewing your contract. And today was your last day in clinic. And that's the first like gut punch. Like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that was the first time, honestly, professionally, I've had it personally, but professionally that's ever happened in my life. And that's arrogance to a degree, but doctors think their jobs are secure. And I didn't do anything wrong. It was completely without cause. They said, not a good fit. That's all they had to say. But that was my final day in clinic. I didn't even get to go back and see staff. They plugged another doctor that they hired for this area, I think a little bit against what the administration wanted, put her right in my office and gave the 3 staff members that I worked with immediately to her and then moved on. So that launched of a lot of personal work to do with myself and my relationships. A lot of damage was done there. And I had a lot of learning and maturing, especially emotionally, to do, but also launched me on this entrepreneurial journey that I knew was coming, but I thought it might come 3 years from now or so, not come right away. So that's a lot to drop on you right there. And I'm happy to talk about any of it, but I know rest is how we can make ourselves resilient to risks like that. The only true risk is the thing we absolutely don't see coming. And we can plan for risks that we think of, but the actual risks are the things we can't think of. Morgan Housel talks a lot about that. So I mentioned that financial foundation. If I didn't have that, I would have been an absolute wreck to go home and tell my wife that. I still was, and we were a mess, but it was not financial. It was more emotional, and we no longer have this security, and there's this trust thing and all of that is so true and real. But it had the financial instability and insecurity on top of that.
Yeah, that would have been, devastating on an already very difficult situation, I'm sure. And thanks for sharing that. I know that there's a lot of folks that listen to this show who are kind of struggling where they're at in their job and with the demands they're being tasked with and the number of patients they're being required to see. And, a couple of things that really stand out is like, one, to understand that other options do exist for you. And 2, you don't necessarily have to be stuck in that job right out of residency. You don't have to jump right to like, hey, let me take this first job in residency for security and hey, financially it looks really great. But if it's something that you don't like, or it's not a good cultural fit, or you don't feel aligned to it, as you mentioned, maybe it's worth taking a step back and reassessing and thinking about, hey, is this something that I really want to pursue going forward? Thanks for sharing that journey and that story. I know it was a challenging time for you, but I know that the future for you looks really bright going forward.
Thank you. Then I share the story is so someone else guaranteed is going to feel less alone from hearing that, and probably multiple people, because I know I'm not the only person who has been abruptly terminated, or whatever phrase you want to use, involuntary exit. Like, it's a different thing if you're terminated with cause. Like, you have something with a patient or a staff member or something, but it's just that we are a state of Wisconsin is at will employment, and all of our agreements say either party can terminate it with a certain amount of notice. And so the only thing coming out of residency that our generation of physicians feel good and secure about is job security. It's not, hey, insurance payments are doing great and everybody's happy being a doctor these days and all, but it's like, you are a doctor. That's a valued thing. There's a shortage. You will always have a job. And yes, that's true. There will always be people for you to treat, but it doesn't mean that the specific job you have will be what you can have it forever, as long as you check the boxes, because that is not true. And that's the fallacy that I fell for. I was very arrogant. I just assumed that they're not going to fire me. Like, yeah, I can be a little annoying. I'm pounding my fist and I'm buzzing around the administration for what reasons I thought were good and valid, but still, I was an employee. Maybe that wasn't my lane, or maybe I wasn't communicating effectively for the changes that I wanted to make or the things I was worried about. But at the same time, I was not given any feedback. 2 years and not a single person said anything to me about, hey, this is feeling like it might be starting to be not a great fit. Let's talk about that. It was just totally a move that was done out of the blue. No one else in my department even knew about it. I mean, the way it was handled was pretty crazy. Not even my boss knew until I knew. So yeah, but it was wild. But I'm grateful for the things that I've done, the financial foundation that I set from long ago, and now the real estate investing that I got into a few years ago, and just putting these various legs on the table. It doesn't have to be real estate. Doctors get real excited about real estate, whether it's the taxes stuff, or we just have there are a few people in our community who have done extraordinarily well, and now we're teaching everyone how to do it. And that's great. But I think it also creates a little bit of FOMO, and it's a vulnerable population, because there are so many doctors who are struggling and suffering, and especially during the pandemic. So I try to push back a little bit on the real estate is the answer. You got to get reps, get your spouse to do that. And now it's got to be shiny object syndrome. And now it's short-term rental. But now that rates are going this way or that, and it's chasing the next new thing. I have a feeling a couple of years from now, all the doctors are going to be teaching each other how to buy small businesses, and all the doctors are going to own car washes instead of STRs. And so those securely putting those legs on your table wherever you happen to enjoy it. And Kristen Yates, Rebel Physician, we were talking about before, I challenged her. I said, why did you move from short-term rental into residential assisted living so quickly? Shiny object syndrome. I have a very healthy fear of that. And I see a lot of people running from place to place rather than just getting good at one of them. She had a great answer. She's like, we rented out our house. I thought it was awesome, really fun thing, but that wasn't for me. I didn't like it. I didn't see enjoying doing that down the road, but I see in this other thing something that I could really enjoy. And I was just like, great answer. That's perfect. And but you just find your other thing. Don't depend on one, especially an employer. Do not depend on one single employer for your income. I don't care if it's real estate or whatever. For me, I like balance. That you got your index funds, you got your set it and forget it stuff. You add on some real estate when you have some additional capital after that. Or if you like to buy car washes, or you're a crypto person, make those multiple streams of income so you and your family can be resilient to risk. Or you can just have more freedom to do whatever you want and pursue whatever you want and start a business and take the risk of starting something that you're dreaming about. But maybe it's late at night. I got the second wind, and
good.
I'm talking too much right
now.
No,
it's your show, my man.
I'm really passionate about this stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think shiny object syndrome kind of gets looked down upon as a bad thing at the time. I think when you're first starting out, a couple things. One, I think you have to have the financial foundation first, which you definitely did. And then from a shiny object syndrome perspective, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing if you're figuring out, hey, what I'm looking for what I really like to invest in. I think you have to focus on one thing to get really good at it, but I don't think it's necessarily wrong to be like, hey, I'm going to try a short-term rental. Oh, I really don't like that. Maybe I should pivot to assisted living or pivot towards multifamily. I think that's okay, but I would say pick a couple of things that you're interested in and you could see yourself potentially doing long-term and becoming an expert in, just like you did becoming a dermatologist, and then narrow that down even further, almost subspecialize into that one asset class that you really enjoy. It gets hard. I feel like there's both ends of, let's be super broad on all kinds of different things, which is totally fine, or let's focus on one asset class in particular, which also works great. I still invest in my TSP and still have a Roth IRA, and of course really love real estate. And there's a lot of different places.
I think that's the move. I just worry about just going totally in on just that one asset class. And for some people it works. There is significantly more risk there. And when you're people like you and me talking at this point, if with the time horizon that unless a really big deal black swan event that is going to make nothing matter, we've won the game in 30 years. So we have to not make ourselves lose the game. That's more of and that I know, especially with real estate, like leverage is just leverage. It's neither good nor bad. And it can kill you just as fast as it can make you think you're the cat's meow. So that's why I'm careful at least about that. And I get worried when, rather than someone trying things and saying, I just didn't like this. The shiny object syndrome for me is like, oh, I'm going to do this thing and I'm actually having fun. But then, oh, this person is having a course on this. And then the interest rates change a little bit and it doesn't seem as, and then I feel like a year ago, every doctor I knew was buying a short-term rental in the Great Smoky Mountains. And like, there was like a run on cabins in the Smoky Mountains and it was all doctors. That's what it felt like. But things change, and especially real estate, there are cycles. And if you get into it on an upswing, and as soon as something starts to change, you're running to the next thing, that you're likely selling high and then buying and sell. Basically, you're going to be buying in high on the next shiny thing. But I agree, the way you framed it is exactly how Kristen answered my question, and that's why I said great answer.
Agreed. Yeah, that's funny thinking about the short-term rentals. And then I think there's also kind of a subset of folks who are like, oh, we'll just buy short-term rentals for tax depreciation. And I'm like, no, that's not a reason to buy a short-term rental.
Yeah,
so,
a lot of way.
You really need to do your due diligence, really need to buy a deal, not just buying something to decrease your tax burden. I don't agree with that at all. But well, if you don't mind, kind of talk to us a little bit more about that financial foundation, or like, what did you learn, or what was a key building block for that foundation for you guys that helped you weather the storm?
I think it's partly just how I was wired growing up. I had to train myself out of very much too attached to money, like actual greenbacks, basically currency. Like I would, as a kid, 10 years old or whatever, even younger, I remember wanting to buy and sell things and get in trouble. Classic entrepreneur story, right? Just getting in trouble selling candy at school or whatever. And I would sell baseball cards on eBay. And I convinced my dad to put my $50 or whatever in his bank account that gave me 10% interest that compounded monthly, like the bank of dad, that makes dad bankrupt in a year or whatever. And I had a teacher, I think in 4th grade, who introduced, and so that these little things are very helpful along the way too. But naturally, I was always drawn to that. So I was interested in money from a young age. I was also insecure about money. My parents were in jobs that I knew did not make high incomes, and I don't know why, but I always had some degree of insecurity about that probably because we didn't talk a lot about money. That is the problem. It wasn't that we didn't have money. There was plenty of money, and they still have plenty of money, and they give me money still. So it's like there wasn't a problem. I think the problem was that we didn't talk about it as a family. So I had to make up stories about it, that they were struggling in ways that they weren't actually struggling or whatever it may have been. So that was along with me. And I was having a Roth IRA as soon as I could. And all of that stuff was natural to me. So I'm grateful that I had that foundation, and I was able to just these little investments, starting back in, I think my first $5,000 that I put in a Roth IRA, it was 3 months before the great financial crisis. Like it was 2006 of like September or something like that. I don't know. It was, so to see that 5K go to like 2,000 immediately, like it's a nice place to learn that, rather than having a million go to 300,000 or whatever. So it's a good time to feel that and be like, okay, I get this. This is what I'm told you're supposed to do. You set it and forget it. And these things happen. And when you zoom out, it goes like this in the end. And I always had those systems in place, and I never wanted to pull back from them, but I eventually got the urge to add to them. I had a W-2 job, so I was interested in all this other parts of the tax code. What's that all about? What's owning a business like? What is real estate like? How can that be interesting for me? So I got interested in wanting to add those things and have additional income streams that wouldn't just be dependent on my employer. And I'm still building those, but because I had those systems working and my money was compounding for a long time, even when I wasn't making much money. I mean, I spent my 8 years in New York City in my 20s making a $30,000 stipend or something. So I didn't have a lot, but I had enough to invest in with some help from my parents, amazingly. So that foundation and just not living below my means. Jim Dolly, before I ever knew who he was, I was doing that because I never wanted to be financially insecure. So I didn't spend a lot. I've taught myself to spend more over time because balance, you want that. I was too much on this side, on not want to spend anything side, but I never wanted to be worried about what we were buying at the grocery store or things like that. So if we wanted to go on a vacation, let's just do it because we did the savings work in all these other areas that we didn't have to worry about those things. And as a result, you can get laid off or whatever happens, and it's not an immediate disaster. It's not a good thing, but it's not an immediate huge problem. And I would advocate everyone to do that to the best of their ability. It's insurance, basically. It's self-insuring for disasters like this that aren't insurable in other ways, really.
Yeah, exactly. Termination, disability. I mean, there's lots of things that can impact our ability as physicians to continue to make the impact that in income. How did real estate come into the picture for you?
Same as a lot of us, I think. The pandemic certainly accelerated it, and that was an unfortunate time. The knowledge and the desire to be accelerated because everyone else was doing the same thing. So we were riding this huge wave, and it was a very scary market to feel like you're trying to invest for the first time. But I was learning and devouring podcasts and blogs and books, like a similar story to a lot of people that I've heard, at least, probably starting in around 2019. And it was frustrating at first because, like everybody, it was like, how do I find a deal? Like, this sucks. Everything's really expensive, not just in the typical places, right? But everything everywhere. It felt expensive, and you don't know anyone yet, so you're not going to find deals anywhere else but the MLS or wherever you're looking. So it was frustrating, but I also knew that eventually I just had to stop reading and do something, and that doesn't have to be a home run. And the first house I bought, I called it my tuition house. And I was willing to lose money on that to get the experience and to meet the people, all of that, form my team and get to the next deal. So that was, I think, mid 2022 or so, a small duplex that was built in like 1910 in town here. And that was my tuition house. After I did the inspection walkthrough, I sat on the curb outside and I just said to myself, don't run. And I remember the inspector, he was like, man, it's just a house. Like, that was a lot, but it's just a house, just some perspective. And, the house, I bought it. I did get a good deal on it because I met a guy, my investor agent, and really funny story how I met him. It was a decent deal. I think I got it for $102,000 or something like that. And he ended up selling it for $140 or so a year later. And I also had decent cash flow on it while I owned it, but I self-managed it. We put a ton of work into fixing it up because it was a piece of crap. The upper unit had been evicted prior to me buying it. So it was absolute trash. And that taught me that I don't want to do this and but at least I got a base hit. I wouldn't have cared if I got out. I at least swung the bat. Even if I struck out, I at least stepped up to the plate and swung the bat rather than sit in the dugout and read like how to hit a baseball. And that's kind of the typical thing is after you get that first deal, it takes you, it might take you 3 years from the first time you pick up a book or read a blog to get your first deal. Then the next one is going to be in 3 months. And then the next one comes along in 3 weeks or whatever your trajectory is. And then you eventually run out of capital, right? And then you start looking at you say, I got all these deals. Who's got some money who wants to team up with me? So that's the fun part about it. The relationships you develop along the way I try to build it so I don't any of the day-to-day stuff. I do not self-managing anymore. I love working with my investor agent, who's also a partner with me on most of the things I own now. And I was so sick of just like not making any progress and being in analysis paralysis. And I was in a coffee shop, and this was when I was still just grinding in the corporate dermatology gig. But once in a while, I'd have some free time to do this creative stuff. And I was just reading a book, and I overheard this guy talking his first investment property when he was 18 years old. And I was like, what's going on here? And I kept listening. And as I left, I didn't have business cards. I wrote my name and number on a scrap piece of paper, ripped it off, stopped by the table and said, excuse me, I'm sorry, I overheard you. I'm a local investor. And if you want to talk to me, here's my name and number. And I apologize for interrupting. I said I'm a local investor, own nothing at that point other than my primary residence. But it's like, you fake it till you make it, I guess. If I was telling myself I'm an investor, so I guess I was. And a week later, he called me, and now we own 20 really nice condo units together with a couple other partner commercial space.
Awesome.
And he has deal flow coming out his ears because he's a hustler. He's in his early 20s, and this is all that real estate is his life, and he loves it. And he knocks on doors, he does all the deal flow stuff, and I don't have to because that's not my zone of genius. I can make money as a doctor, so I can generate capital, I can evaluate deals, I can underwrite, we can have business meetings, all this stuff, and it just works. The partnership works. You just have to find, everyone has their own story like that, but not going to get, if you just have the mindset of what there are no deals out there. There are no deals on the internet, likely that where you're looking. If you're willing to risk someone looking at you like you're crazy by throwing your name and number at them after telling them you.
Yeah, but if you didn't have the courage to go up there and give them that piece of paper, who knows what would have happened, you know?
Exactly. Anything that I've succeeded in is like, it's not that hard. You just have to be willing to do what most people aren't willing to do. So it is hard, I guess. It's just, there's no mystery secret to it. Even building a small business and having it succeed, there are blueprints out there everywhere for $10 at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon or whatever. There are hundreds of them. And if you just read one of them and actually do the work, and that's what 99% of people are never going to do. They might buy the book, they might do a little bit of the work, but they're never going to commit and have that consistency and make the thing successful.
Yeah, I mean, incredible success is on the other side of the fear of failure. And people always get just stuck in that fear of failure, and they miss out on this incredible success. That's awesome. Why condos, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't even think they're technically condos. So let's not talk jargon here. I call them condos because Tyler, my business partner, always just called them the Rosemary condos because they're on a street called Rosemary Street. But there is not a condo association that is involved in them. I don't even really, frankly, care about the distinction between condo or apartment unit. The first deal we bought was pretty much at the height of the market, was an 8-unit building and a 6-unit building right next to each other. And they were really nice. They were, I think, 3 beds, 2 baths. Each had a garage, and it was right by one of the high schools in town. And then the second deal that we just closed on yesterday was a 6-unit that was right next to, there's one duplex in between, and then right next to those on that same street. That actually are even nicer. They are all early 2000s construction, as opposed to the sort of high cash flow but bomb waiting to happen in terms of capital expenditures type of properties that, like that duplex I bought at first, that you could buy it for $100K, but you're waiting to have that $30,000 capex from something going crazy in the house, and all that cash flow for a couple of years is gone in an instant. So I am much happier to have a little less cash flow, likely higher appreciation, certainly less capex over time, and the tenants, we take good care of them and they take good care of us, and that's the goal for it. So in terms of condos, that's just the link, that's just what we call them, but I don't think they're technically condos, to be honest. The cool thing about them is that they're actually all deeded separately. So if we were to need or want, or for any reason, like we needed to raise some capital for something else, there was a great deal that came along. I couldn't find another way to raise it. We could actually sell them individually. Awesome. So that's an interesting part about it. But yeah, that was misleading to call them condos. That's just how I've always thought of them in my head.
That's awesome. That's really cool. They're deeded separately and offers a lot of flexibility going forward. Well, congrats on closing yesterday.
Yeah, and I didn't do anything. It was a normal day for me. I didn't have to do a dang thing, and I was very grateful for that. And I sent a message to Tyler in the morning, and I said, Tyler, you mind doing this walk through yourself. I am not going to add a single ounce of value to it. And I will be not doing the things that I can be doing to generate value, which is, generating more capital, making more connections, talking to people like you who probably have capital, and who knows, down the road in 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a deal together. Who knows? And that's my zone of genius. That's where I'm doing my kind of $1,000 per hour, as opposed to tagging along at a walkthrough where I'm generating nothing and providing no value. So I was happy to send that message, and he was like, yeah, totally. It's snowing anyway. Who cares? Like, you don't need to be here. So thank you for that. And we brought in a couple other partners to make that one work, because as you know, you need money, right? And a great deal comes along, and you make money when you buy. So we really wanted this one, and now we have a couple other partners who I'm excited are going to add value in a lot of other ways.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're right. The capital does run out, but if you have a good enough deal, you're going to find the capital for it. I mean, the money's there. It's just finding the good deal, for sure.
And that's fun. Yeah. That's where the game gets really fun. As soon as you talk about real estate, people are like, what? Or they'll tell you what they do.
Right. Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, and just having those conversations all over the place, you meet so many great people, and everyone, I think, conceptually understands real estate to a degree and is interested enough to want to hear you out and get to know more. And you never know where the capital is going to come from. So that's really cool.
And it's a very friendly, supportive community once you get into it. It doesn't feel competitive. It doesn't feel like people are trying to undercut other people. There's plenty out there. It's a kind of an abundance mindset among successful investors, at least, and always willing to help. It's always a big syndicator or so, and say, let's sit down and have coffee with me. Let me pick your brain. Like, obviously that's not the way to go, but if you try to add some value first, but people are willing to help in general and are excited to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the physician kind of real estate investing space is even more welcoming, because we've all kind of gone through the battle, been in the trenches together in medicine. We understand the difficulties of medicine. We understand that investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice how you want to ultimately, and just how much of a blessing, income from multiple different sources can be, for life going forward. And I think you hit another point that is really important is knowing where you add value to a partnership, and realizing that you don't have to do everything. Partnerships are amazing for that reason. You don't have to do everything, and figure out what it is. What's your zone of genius, and stick into that zone. I have 2 other partners for our assisted living business, and we all have different roles, but we all come together so well. And we all have the willingness to help each other out in all these different areas. But we know, hey, Luke is the negotiator. Charlie he's the engineer. He's the numbers guy. I'm just kind of like the raising capital. I'm the family medicine doc and the group dude's doing a little bit of everything. But it's really helpful to have that discussion and figure out, hey, where can you add the most value? Brandon Turner talks about the deal triangle. And you need the deal triangle, which is knowledge, hustle, or the deal. And you need 2 of the 3, and you probably don't have all 3. And so just finding that other point of the triangle that you need, whether that's the knowledge, whether that's the hustle, whether that's the deal, is super important. So that's where partnerships can just really be so beneficial. And for doctors who are working oftentimes really long hours, we don't have the time to do the property management. And I think it's incredibly valuable what you did to get that tuition, to have that tuition house, to learn the nuts and bolts of what really goes into this and to being successful. But really, realistically, a lot of doctors probably are more on that capital piece, and have the income to raise money or have the capital to invest. So they just need somebody who's got the hustle.
Yeah. And you work too hard unless you just love managing properties and that's your second career, and fine, you become a property manager. Great. But you have worked too hard and have too valuable of a skill set to be spending time doing basic property management. And we all have a fear of spending money on our business and investing in that, or delegating to other people. That's a fear too. You might have the 10% in your budget to pay a property manager, whatever it happens to be, but you don't want to give that up because you don't trust them. But it is important to take that step. And with all deals, even with that one, I underwrote 10% for property management into the deal when I was evaluating it. And so when I chose to manage it, it was gravy on top, but I knew at any time I could just say, hey, someone else do this, and it would still cash flow to whatever my criteria was at that point. And that was important to me. I wanted the experience of it. I was tempted by the higher cash flow because it was my first deal. So I was just feeling like I needed a cookie at that point. So that excited me. And now I want nothing to do with any of it. There is no such thing as passive income, in my opinion. I think it's a great way to get views on YouTube videos and listens on podcasts and sell books and things, but it's work, and you're compensated for it, and the compensation comes at different times, and it's not always proportional to the amount of work. And that's the beauty of things like this. It is not at all passive. We are doing a lot of work, or you're doing a lot of work to generate that income then that you're putting into another asset that you don't have to actively participate in. Thing is completely passive about this. Yeah. And I think that's where people get frustrated. They don't want to put in the work. I mean, you can invest in a syndication, but there's some benefits of that, but you could also just invest in the S&P 500. I mean, that is a passive investment. That's your truly as close to it as you can get. You don't really need to vet the United States of America. Like we've been doing that for a lot of people have done that, but you still have to vet your syndicator, or you should, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, definitely. I think blanket passive income, I completely agree, is not a thing. It's a spectrum. It's degrees of passivity as you go along. The passive income, if you will, is going to be higher, but the time commitments, the demands, the work that goes into getting that higher cash flow is going to be more than, say, your syndication, for example, where you're putting less time in, but it's still work. I completely agree.
I think what people really want is the disconnection of the unit of input to the unit of economic output. And that feels to a lot of us like passive income, which is awesome, because so many doctors, your boss says, you want to raise, see more patients, you can get a raise anytime you want. We're like, that's not how, but that's frustrating to us that we do have, but we don't understand, many of us, how to leverage ourselves. But in real estate, you can leverage money, you can leverage the bank's money, other people's money, but we as physicians can also leverage ourselves. We don't have to only generate value by seeing a person face to face, only one person at a time. We have to think creatively for ways to do that. But I think that one-to-one of active work to income received is the thing that people are really excited to get out of, and it feels passive when it is anything other than that.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the commercial space? Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a fun one. It is an antique store in town that we didn't want a developer to buy it and tear it down. So it was on the market. It wasn't all that expensive, and we felt we sort of got some intel from the guy who was selling it that we could kind of tell that he needed to sell it, and we were able to solve a problem for him. So we negotiated him down a bit. We ended up buying it all in cash, and then we're actually doing a cash out, a refi right now to do it. But it was a fine deal. It wasn't out of the park by any means, but it was also just kind of fun to buy this community asset is in the historical district downtown as well. And we just didn't want all these vendors who were running their antiques out of the store to have to no longer be able to do that when a developer tears it down and puts some apartments or something. So that, who knows what that'll be in the future, but it's a cool space. It's a cool building, and that is still run as an antique store. At the beginning, we had this idea where we were going to be more involved in it, in the actual operation of it, but that ended up being way too much work. And now we're just landlords. So there's a guy who runs it, and I don't do anything at all. It's just fun to say that we own that space, and we sort of preserved it, at least for now, as the antique store. It's called River District Antique Mall.
That's awesome.
But that's a fun one, but it's not a huge part of the portfolio, but it's one I'm still proud of. And that was with that one, actually, I had to raise about 75 was raised via short-term private lending, and was another way of like getting on base, doing that, going through the motions of doing that, all the legal stuff you have to do. And one of the people who lent money on that, one of them was my brother, but I still did it. We still did it by the book. We did all the contracts. They had second liens on the property, all of the stuff that made it a real business transaction. And then the other person who lent part of it is actually one of the new partners we brought in for the deal that we just closed on yesterday.
That's
so
awesome.
All those relationships can be fruitful down the road, but it's also just, I know how to do some orchestrates or get them hard money when I need it now. I've gone through that one time. So if I need to down the road, it's going to be a little easier at least. And so that was the thing that I took out of that experience, which was fun.
A little bit more tuition for you.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, I do want to hit real quickly on direct care and direct care dermatology and what that looks like. A lot of folks listening to the show are familiar with direct primary care, but they probably don't really know that direct care from a dermatology perspective exists. So do you mind kind of sharing a little bit about direct dermatology and what that looks like?
Yes. Thank you for asking. Direct primary care is such an inspiring space, and I think a space that I've been following for a long time myself, and it's clearly only going to continue to pick up steam, and it has changed the way a lot of people receive primary care, and it's changed a lot of primary care physicians' lives in tremendous ways by taking out as many middle people as possible and restoring the physician-patient relationship. And with direct specialty care, which is lagging but now emerging as a viable model as well, that is when specialists also use that model. Sometimes, so for some, it's easier than others. Clearly, it's going to be a little harder for an interventional radiologist to set up shop where they just have a menu of prices, and there's a lot of more overhead and all that stuff. But it is possible, I believe, in any scenario. And there are ambulatory surgery centers that are direct care now, and they just have prices. This is what your knee replacement is going to cost, and it's going to be way less than it would be to the system through insurance. So direct specialty care is simply taking out as many middlemen as possible, restoring that physician-patient relationship. And it's all about building back trust. We as the physicians didn't necessarily do the damage do what caused the trust to be lost, but it's still our responsibility if we want to get out of this mess to get that trust back. And for me, I was just not feeling aligned with what I had to prove to insurance companies in order to get my patients the care they needed. I felt like I was being taken advantage of. I felt like my patients weren't very bought in because they were paying for it in such an indirect way as well. And I think when you're paying directly, you have some skin in the game and you care more, to be honest, even if what you're paying in terms of combination of direct and indirect costs is probably going to be less in most direct care situations. So dermatology, relatively low overhead, which is nice, very amenable to direct specialty care. So I'm throwing my hat in the ring. I'm confident that I can do it, but the biggest thing that biggest mindset shift is there are no more free patients. You do not have insurance companies who are subsidizing your practice with more patients than you could ever imagine taking care of. It is my job to get people in the door. I have to have a premium offer, an irresistible offer that people will say, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I'll pay for that. And insurance companies have done us a favor because we're all used to paying out of pocket even when we have insurance now with copays and deductibles and all that. So it makes it easier, but it's still, they have to have a good reason to choose me instead of their in-network person. And I want to deliver an offer and above and beyond. My practice is actually called Dermatology, and it's because I want to offer that above and beyond service, this hospitality, this thinking about more than just the rash that the person came in with. And these are going to be 60-minute consultations probably for most people, because the person that's going to be drawn to my practice is going to be a person who has been frustrated by the 5-minute visits, or they could also be someone who just has a 6-month wait to get in for their rash that they want dealt with now, so they can see me in a day and they'll come see me for that reason. But I'm excited about it. It's going to be up and running, I think, by the end of January. It's a virtual practice, so it's low overhead in that way too. We'll be serving all of Wisconsin and hopefully other states down the road as I strategically increase. And part of the way I'm marketing that is through what's called the Direct Care Derm podcast, which I launched last week. So I'm joining you in the podcasting game, and I'm having a lot of fun so far. And I appreciate you sharing your platform and your audience with me to talk about that. And if anyone at all is interested, it's not just for dermatologists, anyone at all, especially specialists who are interested in this, it's going to be a great sort of part roadmap and part inspiration for anyone interested in direct specialty.
So you said largely virtual practice?
Right now, I may have brick and mortar in the future. I want that to be optional for me. I want to prove the virtual model for a number of reasons, but selfishly for having that location independent nature of it. But if I do, either if I need just economically to have a brick and mortar location, that's what I'll do. Or I might just say, hey, I kind of want to see people in person if I need to. I am going to likely have an office space just for those rare cases where I'm like, you should really come in, but I'm going to have a system in the practice where the people who clearly need to see someone in person, and there are many of those, I will be referring them and getting them help where they need it, and not pretending that I can do something.
Very cool. Are you thinking more billing from like a acute visit perspective, like a one-time billing, or are you going to be more of a monthly membership style, like direct primary care?
This is it. So the direct primary care model is often a subscription model. And what I imagine working well is a hybrid. Yeah. So some people just need that 5-minute visit, right? And there's no reason to pay for more than in 5 minutes if you just need a 5-minute visit. So if you're coming in with these types of things and it's likely going to take roughly this amount of time, this is how much it is. If it's a new patient, and then if it's a follow-up visit, this is how much. And then I can imagine having programs as well. Say you have a teenager with bad cystic acne. This person's likely going to need isotretinoin. It's going to take 6 months. I'm not going to give up on you until you are completely 100% happy. That whole thing, my services cost this much. It's bundled basically. And I can see that having a program like that for like psoriasis and eczema and stuff too. I don't give up on you until we are completely stabilized, until the point where you and I only need to see each other every 6 months or a year or so. And until we get there, this is much it costs to get us there. And that's just some of the things I'm kicking around. So sort of limited time subscriptions. And then the only other subscription that I could see is someone who's like, I just want to have a dermatologist, like basically on call. I'm not going to be physically on call, but like I might want to go, once a month, whatever it is. Then there could be a monthly subscription just to have sort of unlimited access within constraints.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want a dermatologist that I can have on call 24/7 as a family member. That's awesome. I was thinking through, that would be great. Eczema, psoriasis, acne, probably like, some autoimmune stuff would be fantastic as well.
For sure. All that is what telemedicine works for, especially people would have to travel really far for. I'm not going to be doing skin checks. I'm not going to be looking at the mole that you're worried about, but there are a lot of people who need way more than just those really quick derm visits that are unfortunately the stereotype in the field, and they get frustrated. They don't feel seen and heard, and not everybody needs that, but some people really do. And my practice is going to be a niche practice for people like that.
That's really cool. Well, the riches are in the niches for sure. And I think that that's a really cool way to balance, like a really cool work-life balance and autonomy. And you get to build this practice into whatever you want it to be. And this is yours, and the middleman is taken out. And it's awesome, man. I'm really excited for you. That's
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know it's late there and what's in. As we wrap things up, I had 2 questions. One, just to kind of, overall, what's the best piece of advice that pops into your mind? Like if you had a resident in front of you right now and they're like, hey, how can I build that financial foundation? What would you want me to do, or what would you say I should do? What advice would you give them? And then last, we'll wrap it up with how folks can get a hold of you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for giving me sharing with me your platform and your audience. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm super impressed with what you have done and what you and your family are doing. And I hope that we can continue to have conversations and check in down the road. And you could come on my show and talk to people about how they can add that real estate arm to their table so that they can build their business in a more sturdy way. In terms of advice, for that resident, I would say get a book. I don't care which one it is. There are plenty of them out there. Get one of Jim Dolly's book, get Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich. I think that's the best one that there is now for just go through it front to back, do everything they say, set up the system, set it and forget it. It doesn't matter if you have nothing. You feel like you have nothing to invest or save right now, even if it's $5 that you're putting away every week. Like just set up the systems, because eventually you will have money. And when you have money, if the system is set up, you just drop it in and you can automate it all so you don't have to think about it. And that's when you can safely add things like real estate. You don't have to take away from your set it and forget it allocations of very passive investments that will make you very financially comfortable if you never buy a rental property in your life. This is not a mandatory thing. So if you just do that stuff, you are going to be wonderfully well off if you have a physician's income. But then if you have the urge to add that stuff, that's when you can comfortably add it, and you have that redundancy built into your system that you can ride the cycles. If you're a real estate investor, you are going to be in market cycles just like everyone else. And you have to not panic and change your behavior because of those cycles. So the set it and forget it stuff is so important because it's just so easy. It's like, why would you not pick that low-hanging fruit before you start to do the fancy stuff? So I don't care what book it is. I love Ramit's book because it's entertaining, but it's also just this. I will teach you to be rich. Like, it sounds like a cocky, arrogant title, but it's actually just, I will teach you to be rich. Like, that's what it is. And that's what he does. And it, like, we just don't like the word rich, and that's fine. But it's like, I will teach you to be a normal person with a normal salary, and in 30 or 40 or 50 years have a more money than you could ever imagine having. So that's what I say to that resident. Don't get worked up about what your colleagues are doing, or the kid in your residency class who has a crypto mine or whatever. Like, that is going to happen. Compare and despair. It's like that. Just try to avoid that. But that's how I do talk to residents about that stuff. I share those books with them, and I give like sort of finance talks or life talks to residency programs, which I really enjoy doing. And then finally, how people could reach me. The Direct Care Derm podcast just launched last week. So that's the baby that needs the most support and attention. So you can get that on any of your platforms: Apple, Spotify, Amazon Audible, TuneIn, Stitcher, all of that stuff. LewellisMD.com is my website. You can get my weekly email letter that I send out. You can get a free gift from me over at Retinoids, like the retinoid that you put on your face to keep the wrinkles away. Retinoids for that, and LewellisMD on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. And folks, listen to this. The only way a podcast grows is subscribing to it and leaving a rating. And so go do that for the Direct Derm podcast, and then also do it for Physicians and Properties of Grow. And we really appreciate the support. Well, Stephen, man, this has been awesome. We're going to have to do this again once Derm really takes off for you above and beyond dermatology, and really excited to hear more about that and see how that model works for you. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you.
You're welcome. I'd love to do a check-in, maybe 6 months or something. I'll get naked. I'll give the numbers. I'll say how we're doing. I'll say where I screwed up and where we're doing. When, even though this is a show about real estate, it's also a show about business, right? So I'd be happy to check in again, and would love to have you on the show as well. Here's to rising.
That'd be great. Absolutely, my friend. Well, I really appreciate it. With that, it's been Dr. Stephen Lewellis and Dr. Alex 𝐻𝐤 with another episode of the Physicians and Properties podcast.
Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.